back to Swayam MOOC on British Poetry and Drama, 14th to 17th century. I'm Dr. Vanna Rajoria and I'm very happy to be with you all again. From this point on in our course, we step across a threshold. We leave behind the still and sacred scrolls of poetry, those careful sonnets, quiet elegies, whispered metaphors, and we enter the bright, dangerous, living world of the stage, theatre, a place of breath and blood, of ambition, lust, danger, and drama. A stage where words do not lie on the page, they rise, they burn, they fight, they fall. If poetry was the heartbeat of the Renaissance, theatre was its soul. And no one lit that soul on fire more fiercely or more briefly than Christopher Marlowe. He was the first great voice of the English stage. He arrived before Shakespeare, but he changed everything. He wrote plays that struck like thunder, verses that rang like swords, ideas that flirted with heresy and laughed in the face of heaven. He gave us tyrants, alchemists, seducers, sorcerers, men who wanted more, too much more, men who dared to defy the world, even God, and paid with their souls. But who was he? A scholar? A rebel? A spy? A skeptic? Was he a poet or a heretic? A martyr or a traitor? Or was he simply the brightest mind of his generation, born into a world too narrow to contain him? Today, we walk beside that fire. Today, we step into the shadow and brilliance of Christopher Marlowe, the great Renaissance poet and playwright. But before we actually dive into his life and legacy, let us have a look at the learning objectives of today's session. By the end of this session, you'll be able to understand the major events and controversies in Christopher Marlowe's life. You'll be able to situate Marlowe within the intellectual, political, and religious context of the Elizabethan Renaissance. You'll be able to recognize the influences of humanism, skepticism, and early model science in Marlowe's worldview. You'll also be able to appreciate the daring spirit of Marlowe's writing and the risks he took as a dramatist. So you'll be able to prepare to engage with Dr. Faustus as a play that captures the conflict between Renaissance aspiration and the theological constraints, the play which we'll be taking up at length through the next sessions. The story which we learned today is story of Christopher Marlowe, a poet, a dramatist, a spy, a heretic, a genius, a ghost whose influence still lingers in every thunderous line of blank verse. Let us begin where the fire first flickered. Let us start with the birth of this great playwright. In the old cathedral city of Canterbury, under the shadow of spires and the scent of ink and leather, a boy was born in 1564. Remember the year. The very same year as William Shakespeare was born. But while the early years of Shakespeare's life remain cloaked in mist, half legend, half silence, Marlowe's path strikes like a comet through the Elizabethan sky. He was the son of a shoemaker, a craftsman who stitched soles for a living. An ordinary beginning, you might say, a humble one, but his mind was anything but ordinary. From a very young age, it was clear this boy did not walk, he soared. He earned a scholarship to the prestigious King's School, Canterbury, where cloisters echoed with Latin chants and debates about heaven and earth. Then he rose further to Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, the place that forged the minds of priests, scientists, and statesmen all alike. It was in Cambridge that he drank deeply from the fountains of antiquity. He was exposed to Greek classics, tragedy, Latin epics, Aristotelian logic, philosophical thoughts, the rules of rhetoric, and all this sharpened his mind like a blade. He was being trained for the church, yes, but even as they handed him scriptures, he was already asking dangerous questions and doubting everything. For Marlowe, education was not obedience, it was ignition. And somewhere in those candlelit halls, between Horace and Heraclitus, between Ovid's verses and the book of Job, a seed was planted. A seed of doubt, a flicker of rebellion, a spark that would one day leap from the study to the stage and set the world on fire. He was groomed in the classics very deeply, and these Greek tragedies, classics, all of them, they motivated him somehow to question everything, right from faith to authority, to the limits of man's ambition, religion, God. But, his life actually was full of controversies. It was a very happening life. And it is basically a story of, what happens when the brightest mind of a generation starts asking questions and the world isn't ready to answer. There is a strange thing about this human existence. Somehow we are never open to questions, and we always dislike the person who questions. But, dear friends, this is, the platform. Literature is the, course where we encourage this in the first place. All that you should develop starts with developing the spirit of questioning. So, as Marlowe started learning, he also started living a mysterious life. Behind the ivory towers and Latin prayers, there was a difficult path which, was already forming its way for Marlowe. A path that led not to the pulpit but to the shadows. In 1587, Marlowe completed his years of brilliant study at Cambridge University. He was ready for the award of master's degree, but then everything started faltering. The Cambridge University authorities, they hesitated. They did not want to give Marlowe his degree. Why? Because, they asserted that Marlowe lived a questionable life. He was disappearing, vanishing from the campus for long stretches, and it was said that he associated with wrong kind of people. Rumors swirled about him. Had he crossed the Catholic territory? Was he consorting with Jesuits again? Was he a traitor in making? Just as his degree was hanging in the balance, a letter arrives from no one else but the Queen's Privy Council herself. He had done Her Majesty good service in matters touching the benefit of his country. This is what the letter said. Cambridge is ordered, yes, ordered to grant the degree. What good service? What matters? We are never told, but the whispers grow louder. Was Marlowe a spy? A messenger for the crown? A double agent? We may never know the full truth. But what we do know is this. From this point forward, Christopher Marlowe was not just a playwright. He was a man with two lives, one in the light of literature and one in the shadows of power. This tension between intellect and danger, between brilliance and betrayal, will haunt every line of Marlowe you'll come across. To understand Marlowe's life, we must understand the spirit of the Elizabethan age, the age which created him. Elizabethan Renaissance was no gentle spring, it was a violent storm, full of contradictions, a world split in two. On one side, you had crumbling remnants of medieval certainty, a universe held together by faith, hierarchy, and divine order. On the other, the thrilling terror of modern thought, where man had started questioning almost everything, Man had started doubting nothing but even religion and God. They started questioning, what if we are not the center of the cosmos? New discoveries were being made, new inventions unfolded, telling people words of the Bible, the old words spoken in, holy Latin, they might be false. And all these new questions, questions which all the great philosophers, thinkers, explorers had brought. Copernicus had told people that Earth was not the center of the universe, it moved around the sun. Columbus had cracked the map wide open, showing the earth was not as flat. Alchemy had started flirting with science. Humanism had started, reviving ancient ideas, giving them, a modern touch. The pulse of this age was not of obedience, but aspiration, not at all of submission, but searching, not of fear, but fire. Marlowe stood at fault line of this seismic shift. He did not write from within the old order, never confirming. He challenged it. He mocked at it. He tore it apart, syllable by syllable. His heroes did not kneel. They commanded, they conquered, they reached too far, and that reaching became his tragedy. My friends, Marlowe's life was a reflection of all the turbulence, the disturbance which you would find in this Elizabethan age. And, he basically was one of the most powerful roaring voices of the time. His plays, they did not whisper, they roared. They struck the stage with lightning. They demanded the audience sit upright and listen. And the voice that echoed through his verse was the voice of raw, unapologetic ambition. Take for example this line from Tamburlaine the Great. Infinite riches in a little room. Infinite riches in a little room. 6 words. And in them, the entire philosophy of life of Marlowe. This was not just the cry of a tyrant. It was the motto of an age, the prayer of a mind that wanted everything, all knowledge of, all life and all that was contained in it. You see, his heroes, did not fall because of their sin. They fell because they wanted too much. And in their failures, they became sublime. Because for Marlowe, it wasn't enough just to live, to hunger, to defy, to burn. That was the mark of his greatness. He made poetic ambition, transcendental. As we look at life of Marlowe from close, we also realize that, there was something heretical in his nature. There were many accusations which were leveled against Christopher Marlowe, and one of them was that of atheism. Yes, atheism was a charge, remember, in Elizabethan England, that was not just a heresy but a treason. It was in that age that to deny God was to defy monarchy, church, and the entire system. And this, as it seems, was, the word Marlowe was actually confronting. Behind Marlowe's literary brilliance, there was an unafraid mind. He kept on challenging everything. He kept on questioning everything. And, it never remained silent also. People kept on talking about it. There were many charges against him, but the most notorious charges were leveled against him by Baynes' notes submitted by government informant Richard Baynes. It listed Marlowe's alleged heresies, and chief among them was that the first beginning of religion was only to keep men in awe. Remember, when he reported that Marlowe said this in a single line, what is Marlowe doing here, according to him? Stripping religion completely of its divinity, recasting the tools of control. There were many, many scandalous statements which were connected to Marlowe. Marlowe said that all they that love not tobacco and boys are fools, that if there be any good religion, it is in the papists. These words shocked people. We don't know whether these were Marlowe's true beliefs or they were inventions of his enemies, people who were jealous of him. But the revelations were dangerous. So, they talked about a writer who thought and spoke too freely for the comfort of his time. Even his fellow playwright, Thomas Kidd, when he was caught, arrested, and questioned by the authorities, he blamed Marlowe for the heretical texts which were found in his own house. Another informer later claimed that Marlowe basically led a group of, intelligentsias who believed that world was wrong about God. This wasn't just dissent. It was seen as an intellectual rebellion, and its echoes ring through Dr. Faustus, a play which we are going to take up, a play where scholars turn from theology to sorcery, defying heaven itself, saying the reward of sin is death. That's hard. Oh, what a world of profit and delight is promised to the studious artisan. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain about Marlowe, that he gave voice to those thoughts which others dared not even whisper, and by doing this, he transformed English drama into a battleground of human soul. Such a heroic life, it is so sad that it was cut very short. On the evening of 30th May 1593, Christopher Marlowe's life came to a sudden and violent end. He was only 29 years old. The official account states that Marlowe was dining at a tavern in Deptford near the Thames with 3 other men, Robert Poley, Nicholas Cares, and Ingram Fraser. All 3 were known to be connected with Elizabethan intelligence service. According to the coroner's report, a dispute broke out over the bill, referred to as the reckoning. Marlowe allegedly attacked Fraser, who in self-defense drew a knife and fatally stabbed Marlowe above the right eye. The wound was instantaneously fatal. He died in the company of agents. Modern scholars continue to debate whether Marlowe's death was a political assassination, an intelligence cover-up, or a convenient removal of a man who had become too outspoken and too dangerous. And yet, though Marlowe died, his voice continued to echo. He did not die with his death. We can only imagine if he had lived long, what he might have created and what fame he might have achieved. Within the few weeks of his death, tributes began to appear. People started mourning. They had understood, they could sense the deep loss. George Peele called him Male, the muse's darling. Ben Jonson praised his mighty line. And Shakespeare, who had been quietly writing in Marlowe's shadow, learning from him, paid him homage to him in his play As You Like It, calling him the Dead Shepherd. Christopher Marlowe changed English drama forever. He brought classical grandeur, philosophical daring, and psychological complexity to the stage. And in doing so, he laid the foundation for the playwright who would follow him and surpass him, most significantly, William Shakespeare. But before we will move to Shakespeare, we will first explore Marlowe's greatest masterpiece, Dr. Faustus, a play that fuses all the elements of his brief, blazing life: ambition, rebellion, learning, temptation, and damnation. Now that we have looked at this short but grand life of Marlowe, let us take a moment to look at his literary contribution. Though he lived a very brief life, but his artistic output was both prolific and transformative. His plays mark a radical departure in the history of English drama. Let us one by one have a look at, the major works, and let us see what is the depth of his legacy. Tamburlaine the Great, his two-part epic poem, written in blank verse, it basically is a great dramatic force in English theatre. Before Tamburlaine, the stage lacked rhythmic grandeur. So it was Marlowe, through it, who gave, stage its music, majesty, and momentum. And the mighty line that would become the hallmark of Renaissance tragedy. Its hero basically was based on Central Asian conqueror Timur. And he, in this play, rises from shepherd to emperor, driven by a boundless will to power. He declares nature that framed us of four elements, warring within our breeze for regiment, doth teach us all to have aspiring minds. Powerful lines, isn't it? This drama is not simply about military conquest. It is about the cosmic appetite of human spirit to master destiny and even gods. Next great work by him was The Jew of Malta. It was written somewhere between 1589-90. With Barbarous, Marlowe introduces one of English drama's earliest and most disturbing anti-heroes. Then comes Edward II, published in 1594. It is one of the psychological tragedies in English literature. Edward II marks a shift from heroic overreach to emotional vulnerability. Its final scenes, where Edward is imprisoned and murdered, offer a deep vision of human suffering, far more intimate and raw than any history play that came before. Shakespeare would learn much from this play. Next great work by him is Massacre at Paris, 1593. Though extant only in a fragmentary form, this play dramatizes the Bartholomew's Days massacre of 1572, when thousands of people were slaughtered in France. Hero and Leander is another work which was published posthumously in 1598. It was an unfinished work, but the poem, showcases Marlowe's brilliant lyricism, sensual, witty, and emotionally charged, in contrast to his, tragic grand dramas. His Hero and Leander is steeped in pleasure and playfulness, yet never loses its edge. Lucan's first book, another effort of Marlowe in translation, and that too in blank verse, is basically a translation of a Roman epic by Lucan. And it demonstrates, Marlowe's fascination with Stoic philosophy and moral chaos. While we remember Marlowe as a playwright, we must also remember that he was a poet and he was lyrical also. His most famous piece, Come Live With Me and Be My Love, is among the most beloved of all English pastoral poems and we'll sit upon the rocks. There is something dreamy about it, seeing the shepherds feed their flocks. The poem captures a rare, gentle note in Marlowe's canon, a glimpse of innocence in a body of work otherwise defined by fire and fury. If there was one work for which, Marlowe was to be remembered, if we had only one work by him, a single drama to capture the soul of the Renaissance, its ambition, its daring, no doubt it would be Dr. Faustus, written towards the end of his life and published posthumously in 1604. Dr. Faustus stands as Marlowe's most philosophical, poetic, and disturbing work. The play tells of a Wittenberg scholar who, frustrated with the limits of human knowledge, human learning, turns to necromancy, decides to sell his soul to devil Lucifer in exchange of 24 years of, knowledge and power. What begins as triumph soon becomes his tragedy. Faustus is not merely a man of ambition. He is the mirror of the age. In Dr. Faustus, Marlowe did not just write a tragedy. He captured the spiritual anxiety of an entire civilization, a world torn between the old theology and the new science, between salvation and selfhood. The play is not simply about devils. It is about the price of our deepest desires. As we begin our close reading of Dr. Faustus in the next module, remember, Faustus is not merely a man, he is a question. And that question still burns. Marlowe's legacy still continues, still lives to inspire people. Though Christopher Marlowe lived a brief life, died only at 29, but the fire which was there, the power which was there in his works, they gave him a permanent place in the avenues of English literature. In a single decade, he transformed the English stage radically, irreversibly. He gave Renaissance drama its true tragic heroes, not allegorical puppets, but passionate, feasible, fallible human beings, and its first poetic language that pulsed with rhythm, energy, psychological insight, and great power. He's remembered for the characters, who dared to defy God, fate, human limitations, things, we even can't resist today. Somehow, Marlowe transgressed the boundaries and paid the price for his ambition. But without Marlowe, it is not an exaggeration to say that there would not have been Shakespeare also as we know him today. Shakespeare's early plays, Henry VI, Richard III, Titus Andronicus, they all echo Marlowe's structure, his themes, and more importantly, his powerful music. Shakespeare took Marlowe's mighty line and refined it, but he never left it behind. Marlowe's influence resounded through generations. Ben Jonson called his verses mighty lines. Samuel Terrell Coleridge, our great romantic poet, praised his union of daring energy and intellectual subtlety. Our modern poet, T.S. Eliot, wrote that the verse of Marlowe and Shakespeare has a permanence no free verse can possess. Stephen Greenblatt, among modern scholars, reads Marlowe as a poet of the liminal, standing at the threshold of heresy, rebellion, and revolution. Even today, Marlowe haunts the imagination of artists and thinkers drawn to the dangerous edge of genius, the kind that creates, questions, and consumes. An end of our discussions about Marlowe's life, his works, and controversies about him and his legacy. In our next session, we'll be reading his greatest masterpiece, Dr. Faustus, Act 1. And in the next session, when we begin with Faustus in his study, we find him alone, proud, brilliant, untumbling, on the edge of eternity. Please read this act in advance and ask yourself, what does Faustus truly want? Remember, find out what does Faustus truly want and why must it cost him everything. Until then, may you think boldly, question deeply, and prepare to meet the most tragic mind of the Renaissance. Thank you.